Olá pessoal, no vídeo de hoje eu vou trazer a história de uma pessoa que era um fundamentalista cristão. Realmente, uma pessoa que evangelizava os outros, que saía pelos Estados Unidos buscando converter as pessoas. E essa mesma pessoa, o Dan Barker, pela própria busca honesta pela verdade, acabou se tornando um ateu. Ele inclusive foi ao show da Oprah, pela primeira vez falando publicamente sobre ateísmo, com uma plateia cheia de fanáticos da Bíblia. E o processo pelo qual ele passou mostra que não é impossível alguém que foi criado num mundo fanático, religioso, por meio da integridade intelectual e do compromisso com a verdade, sair disso e encontrar o seu próprio pensamento, honesto e genuíno, enxergando até mesmo as armadilhas dentro da ideologia religiosa. Então, nesse vídeo a gente vai falar sobre essa história. Bom, eu vou basear boa parte do vídeo nessa palestra que ele deu, que está aí editada em um vídeo do canal A Dose of Truth, que também é um canal muito legal, que traz discussões sobre ateísmo e espiritualidade. E a gente vê no depoimento dele que foi um processo muito individual. Ele não ficou sendo influenciado por ateus, por ideologias políticas para sair do cristianismo. Não, foi sozinho. Ele percebeu que essa conversa interna que eu acho que eu tenho com Jesus, na verdade é explicada de maneira natural, com a evolução. Os arrepios que a gente tem na pele, as sensações boas, são hormônios, são estímulos. É uma conversa imaginária, e disso ele concluiu, olha, se essa conversa com Jesus é imaginária, até mesmo Deus pode ser uma espécie de figura de linguagem grande. Então ele passou a questionar e a construir o seu próprio caminho, sua própria trajetória.
I really saw myself as an evangelist, not so much as a local stay in one place kind of preacher, but as an evangelist who was out winning souls, bringing people into the kingdom. And so I went on an 8-year cross-country evangelism, thinking, maybe Jesus is going to wait long enough for us to preach one more sermon and bring some more. And we had altar calls, and we preached and sang, and then I started having little kids, and I was driving this little yellow Chevy Nova around the country. All of our stuff was in storage, no income. We didn't charge, we just took love offerings. Why would we need to save money? The world's going to end. Why even care about any of that? And sometimes after the meetings, if they took a love offering, we would open the envelope to see if there's enough cash to get to the next church. We were like, it was that kind of a thing, really living by faith, not just having faith, but living by faith, trusting, And I was so excited, and I was so positive, and I would pray, and I would see answers to prayer, and I would see miracles, and I would get goosebumps when I was talking to Jesus and all that. And in fact, I can still do that right now. As an atheist, I can go back somewhere quiet and speak in tongues, and all those feelings come back. Whoa, and I can feel this kind of parent figure, a peace that passes understanding, and I get goosebumps, and it's a pretty amazing thing. I have atheist friends who think that religious people are just faking it. Well, they're not. Well, some of them. Some of you in this room know what I'm talking about, don't you? You've had religious experiences, and they're very real. They don't point to anything outside the mind, but they're very powerful things that happen in the brain. And I didn't realize it at the time, but goosebumps were not evidence of the Holy Spirit. Goosebumps, do you know what? Goosebumps are evidence of evolution. Because our ancestors were hairier, right? And their fur, their hair, for thermal control, you've seen animals or birds, they fluff up when it's cold. Or to look larger to scare off an attacker, right? You've seen animals do that. So our ancestors used that. Well, it's an atavism. It's something we inherited. We don't use it anymore, but it's an evidence that we evolved from ancestors who did fluff up their hair for those reasons. But at the time I thought, no, goosebumps are actually powerful evidence of the Holy Spirit. There's a whole bunch of people who are susceptible and are looking for meaning. And I would look over at you for a minute and say, okay, well, excuse me for saying this. I hope you don't think I'm intruding, but you're having some real problems in your life right now, aren't you? How does he know? And you're struggling with a personal relationship right now, aren't you? It's funny and it's embarrassing, but this works. Talk to people like that in these tones of, and well, you know what? I know how you feel because I used to feel that way too. It's like you're a ship without a rudder, and what's the meaning of life? Why are you here? How do you make decisions? What's it all about? Where do you find real peace and happiness? But I was just like that, and I understand. And you know what? I found Jesus, and Jesus is the answer. And Jesus changes everything. He'll make you a new creature if you give your life to him. And you'd be surprised how many people agree with that and how few people over those 19 years actually said anything critical. The mindset of fundamentalists is a binary brain. It's either right or wrong, good or evil, black or white, yes or no. That's how I thought, and that's how fundamentalists in all religions think. There's no middle ground in their thinking, which might explain why it's hard for you sometimes to talk to people like that. Most of our lives are in the gray area, and if you use words like that to a fundamentalist, it has to go one way or the other in their brain. It has to go, oh, this is bad, or this is good. Nothing can be half good. I mean, at least in the mind of the way I was at that time. So there was no way back then, as a fundamentalist believer, waiting for the second coming of Jesus, there was no way that I was just going to wake up one morning and then go, oh, ha, ha, silly me. There's no God. Oh, how could I have been so stupid? What was I thinking? Because I lived it. I felt it. I believed it. I lived by faith. And the frontal lobe of our brain is the most recently evolved feature of the human primate. And therefore, it is the last thing to finish developing. We don't just come out, we're not just born fully developed. We're developing even through our lives. And it doesn't fully develop until about the mid-20s. The frontal lobe is the part of you that checks, that's got the social moral restraint over your basic animal instincts. The frontal lobe is kind of like you're finally growing up when that thing finally matures, if ever, I guess. And so something felt different in my mind. All of a sudden I started thinking that, hey, there's more to learn here. There's people with different points of view. These ministers that I'm meeting, they're not stupid. They're not bad people. But they have a different theological view from me. And wait a minute. But I have the truth and they don't. But wait a minute. They're nice guys. And so all this stuff was going through my brain. And I think it was all coupled with just growing up. And the fact, darn it, that Jesus hadn't come again. It started within me, all of a sudden, this huge hunger to read. I went through this migration. And suddenly, after a couple of years of that, I was still preaching and still believing, but my sermons were less hell and more love. My sermons were less about the afterlife and more about living this life. As a few more years passed, and suddenly I realized, as I was reading more science and more philosophy and starting to reading things, that my definition of God had changed. I remember driving the freeways of Southern California, thinking about all this and praying and thinking about the human brain and thinking about and then this little voice in the back of my head was saying, it wasn't this father figure voice, it was this Dan Barker voice back here saying, Dan, admit it, something's wrong. Admit it, just admit something's wrong with the way you think. You're not this know-it-all. You're not the person who, after centuries of religious division, you're the guy that's got it all figured out. You're the guy that's going to tell the whole world that your theology is the right one. Every denomination of Christians, everyone can open the Bible and prove to you that they have the right interpretation and the others are off in some way, or they're even heretical, right? They can all do that. I could do that. I could open the Bible to you and say, read it with an open mind and an open heart, and you'll see the truth, which is the way I see it. You'll see it the way I see it. But of course they don't. Human beings are not like that. There's all these different interpretations. And I realize that when Paul said in the Bible, God is not the author of confusion, can you think of a single book that's caused more confusion than the Bible? Really, think about it. Everyone thinks they have the right way, and they all disagree with each other. And I got to this place where I started realizing, well, you know, the prodigal son is a parable, and Adam and Eve are most likely a metaphor, because now from evolution we know there couldn't have been an Adam and Eve. There just couldn't. It's impossible. So it had to be a metaphor. So if that's true, then maybe even God himself is just one huge figure of speech. Maybe God himself is just a big metaphor, a way for the human race to tell a parable, a story about our existence that gives us meaning in some moral way.
E veja a ênfase que ele dá na palavra verdade, porque ele achava que o cristianismo era verdade, mas com o tempo, à medida que ele foi se aprofundando e buscando se intelectualizar e conheceu a filosofia, as ciências, ele viu que tinha bastante coisa estranha ali e que talvez aquela não fosse a verdade. A pluralidade das religiões também foi um fator para ele. Ele viu, olha, tem essas outras teologias que estão tão convencidas quanto eu que estão com a verdade. Não é possível que todos nós estejamos com a verdade. Então, pode ser que eu esteja errado. Então há um movimento de humildade que falta muito nos religiosos, que tanto falam da humildade, que tanto falam de Deus, que tanto falam de virtude. As pessoas que mais têm Deus na boca, e o amor e a virtude, geralmente são aquelas que não estão praticando tanto assim, quanto as outras que não falam, mas praticam.
This voice is saying, Dan, something's wrong. But over here, this voice saying, yeah, but I'm talking to Jesus right now. Don't bother me, I'm talking to Jesus. But are you really? What? Yeah, but it feels right. Yeah, but all religions say that. But are you sure that you're not just talking to yourself? No, and so it's like this eyeball that's looking around the world. Look at those Hindus. Look at those Muslims. Look at those wacky Mormons. Look at those, look at these. And then suddenly that eyeball went like this. And that was weird. I became my own science experiment. It's freaky. It's really a freaky thing when you know you have the truth and you know it's real and you feel it. And I can still reproduce those feelings right now. I could feel this presence and talk to this being who isn't there. But it was like a humbling thing that happened. It was like, wait a minute. I'm the know-it-all, right? I'm the guy who's got to have this absolute truth, but what do I know, And for me, at least, and I have other atheist friends who were raised religious, they say the same thing. They were brought down a few notches. They were brought off of the arrogant high horse or the narcissistic idea that we are specially chosen, or that a group of people is a chosen people, or that a certain church is the true church, that kind of thinking, which basically all it does is it creates divisions in our societies. It builds walls. It creates an in-group and an out-group. I got to the clear end edge of this migration, and it was in the summer of 1983, and I realized, you know what? Let's be honest here. There really is no evidence for a God. I became this brand new baby atheist. I read a book by a woman named Annie Laurie Gaylor called Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So. And I thought, wow, the Bible's treatment of women in law. I wrote her a letter and I said, thanks for writing this book. And I told her a little of my story. And she and her mom had started the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the mid-'70s. So they said, well, could you write an article for our newspaper? And I did. I wrote an article for, I think it was June of '84. And then I got a call from a woman in Chicago. I was in California. And she was a producer for a show with a woman who was a host. Her name was Oprah Winfrey. And she said, we're going to have Ann Gaylor and Annie Laurie Gaylor on the show to talk about atheism on Oprah Winfrey's show, and we asked if they know any other good stories, and they told us about you. So I flew to Chicago.
Como o Barker falou, há pessoas que são desonestas, manipuladoras, que não querem saber da verdade, que estão ali por algum motivo político, de poder, ou o que quer que seja. Mas há também aquelas que realmente estão ali dentro da cultura evangélica, por exemplo, porque acham que aquilo é verdade. Aquilo norteia o mundo delas. Mas se elas mudarem de ideia, sim, é possível que parte dessas pessoas abandonem a religião, como também já aconteceu de membros do meu canal virem falar comigo, que estão no processo de sair da religião e de terem conhecido o meu canal. Então, isso é possível, isso é um caminho real. Até mesmo para fundamentalistas. Como aconteceu com o filho do líder do Hamas, que foi criado naquela cultura e que saiu daquilo. Por um movimento da sua própria razão e integridade. Então, isso também é possível para qualquer um de vocês que estão aí lutando contra uma crença que já não se identifica mais, e você pode contar com o apoio desse canal e da comunidade em torno dele. Comenta aí quando foi que você percebeu que a religião que você estava era falsa e quais os passos foram fundamentais para que você saísse disso. Obrigado e até a próxima.